in that place where all stories are our story, there's a reminder of a story. It's the story about that king called Viswa Mitra, who was on his way back from the battlefield with a troop of soldiers after defending his realm, when he had to traverse the deep forest at the edge of his kingdom. But he arrived at a place in the forest where suddenly the energy changed. He felt the burdens that he'd been carrying, even the fatigue of the battle, fall away from him. And he did recognize that he had entered the realm of the great saint and sage Visartha. But as he went deeper into the forest, he came to a clearing. And in that clearing there were a number of great trees, somewhat in a circle, and under each tree there sat an ascetic in deep meditation. And there, in the middle of the clearing, was a simple hut, bamboo and thatch, and sitting outside was the great saint and sage Visartha himself. So with great obeisance, the king went over and knelt before the sage, who opened his eyes and came out of meditation to greet the king. And after the pleasantries, they got into some deep, deep conversation, and the day passed very quickly. And the moment came when the king said, "It is time for me to leave. I must take my troop of tired and hungry soldiers back to my realm, back to my kingdom, back to my palace." But Visartha said, "Yes, your soldiers are tired and weary and hungry. Let me provide for them." "Oh, no, said the king. "There's a great troop of them. This would be too much problem and trouble." No, said the sage. And with that, almost like a prayer, almost like an invocation, the sage said, "Subhuti, Subhuti." And suddenly, in front of the troop of soldiers and the king, the atoms seemed to dance. And all of a sudden, they all came together in the form of a cow. Beautiful limpid eyes and horns that grew out, seemingly to reach up to the heavens, and glowing, radiant. And the sage said, "Subhuti, we have guests." And without another word being spoken, the king and all the soldiers who were present found themselves with the food of their longing presented to them. Of course, the king was totally impressed and overwhelmed by this, and suddenly greed and covetousness entered into him, and he thought to himself, "I want that cow." So he said to the king, how much can I offer you for your cow? The sage said, oh, this cow has no price. There is nothing that you could offer that would be its worth. The king said, I'll give you half my kingdom if you give me that cow. You don't need this cow. You have everything you want, but look, I have a kingdom that's got to be taken care of, my people. But the sage said, you don't understand, because this cow is myself. It comes unbidden to one who has attained the state of desirelessness. But the king was ignited with the need for this cow. And he said, well, if you won't sell it to me, I'll take it from you. So he called his soldiers to take the cow. But as they attempted to do so, the cow again disappeared into all the flecks of light and was gone. But by now the king was so incensed with his desire for this cow, his eyes were blood red, and he took his leave from the sage without so much as a thank you, determined that he would either get this cow or he would take his revenge. So the sage, of course, went back to his meditations. The king went back to his palace, but there was no satisfaction in his heart. He paced back and forth. He couldn't sleep at night for longing for this cow. And so it came to the moment when he gave his kingdom over to his son, and he went into the forest himself, determined that he would gain the powers that would allow him either to take the cow or have his revenge on the king. So he fasted. He did all those rituals, made the incantations that bring forth the occult powers. And after some time, he had gained quite a pantheon of occult weapons. So with these in his possession, he went back to the place in the forest where the sage lived. When he arrived there, the sage, as usual, was sitting in lotus position outside his bamboo-thatched hut. So the king approached and immediately sent forth a flame from his occult pantheon, which ignited the simple hut so that it went up in flames, engulfing the sage as it did the hut. Now the king was greatly pleased. That was easier than he thought. But to his very great surprise, as the flames abated, the sage was there, standing, his hair singed and his dhoti charred. But standing he was, holding only a wooden staff. Now the king took out more weapons from his collection and sent them towards the sage. But to his very great surprise, it seemed that the staff the sage was holding opened like a great cavern, and took in whatever it was that the king was sending, rendering it innocuous so that it disappeared without a trace. So the king was left only with what remained in his collection. So he sent it all towards the sage, and again the same thing happened. The staff that the sage was holding seemed to become a great opening in which all that entered it disappeared as though it had never been. The king was totally incensed, but beaten. But by now the great sage had become larger, and he was angry. He said, "Since you have tried to destroy me, I will destroy you." But then all the ascetics who were sitting under the trees spoke in unison, "Visartha, Visartha, do not abandon your peace." And suddenly Visartha, the great sage, held his staff in front of him and returned to his tranquility. He said to the king, "May your anger be the force that brings you to peace." And with that, he resumed his meditative pose and closed his eyes in meditation. The king, of course, beaten, suddenly had the realization, and a transformation took place. He realized that he could not take, but that he must himself find that place to allow unbidden what it was that he so longed for. In the previous rendering of this story, it was to do with the staff and what that staff represented for us. But having recognized and claimed that which it represents, the question that's asked now is, what is it that Subhuti, the cow, means for us? What is it that comes unbidden, or in this case, invoked? What is this cow, Subhuti? And could it be said that in this place, whether we invoke calling or whether we remain in this state, that what is needed comes to us? What is it we're discovering about this place and state? What is the dynamic now that is there for us in life? What is it that we can now recognize that's there when it's not there, and when it's there, when there's interaction with life. If you know what I mean. What is this cow in this story called Subhuti?